Media experts say that you are very likely to switch to a different channel or the next video as soon as I start talking about climate. Every year, we hear about record-breaking temperatures and increasingly frequent events like droughts and floods. I could tell you, wait, there's hope. Country representatives are meeting in Brazil at a conference called COP30, and they'll put us back on track to avoid the worst. But the reality is, it's complicated. And maybe we should expect more from our leaders and our country's climate commitments. I'm Tomasz Koper, and this is Connected on Taiwan Plus. After that grim introduction, I do bring you a silver lining in the form of our guests today who can hopefully tell us what's happening in Brazil and how the world can meet its climate goals. Joining us from Taipei, we have Liangyi Chang, a climate activist and sustainability consultant. And also from Taipei, Nate Maynard, an environmental consultant and currently the Director of Strategy for Sustainability at Red Peak. Nate, I'm going to start with you. The delegates are meeting in Belém for the 30th COP, or the Conference of Parties, who are signatories to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. After 3 decades, what has been the legacy of COP?
Hey, Tomas, great to be back speaking about COP again. Now, it's the 30th one, as you mentioned, and the changes are not seen so much in the negotiations themselves, but the technologies and the policies that they support. So, when we first started negotiating climate change, solar was barely a commercial technology. We didn't have very much wind energy, and there was really almost no such thing as energy storage. But today in 2025, wind, solar, and batteries, and even when you combine all three, are some of the cheapest forms of energy that we've ever created, even without subsidies. So, that alone in terms of electricity transformation has been huge, and you need to rely on things like COP to get all countries to agree. We're now seeing a lot more climate investment, especially these past few years. And while it may have fallen out of favor in kind of like mainstream political discourse, the climate movement continues to grow and gather strength. So COP has a purpose. It's not always clear what that is, though, from the outside, or if you look at the policy texts.
I'm glad you mentioned technology and financing because I want to discuss both of those things later in the show. But first, Liangyi, Taiwan is not a signatory to the UN framework I just mentioned. So do global conferences like COP matter to the Taiwanese government and the people of Taiwan?
Sure. I think it's still like creating a milestone for many sense. So in the past, I think the past decades, the Taiwanese civil society have been growing, and now the national government, they are declaring their NDC. That makes another mark that for us to really monitor and then to see how the net zero target can we meet. And then if you look back from the Kyoto Protocol toward the Paris Agreement until now, I think the 3 decades has been marked for many good groups standing up for climate actions, for the young people, younger generations, for the gender equality, for the social movement to merge and to work together. I think that's really rare to my observations.
Okay, before we continue, let's take a quick look at current climate commitments and whether they're strong enough. According to the 2024 UN Emissions Gap Report, if countries continue with their current climate policies, the world will miss both the 1.5 degree and 2 degree warming limit targets by a wide margin. Even conditional NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, which basically assume a lot of conditions will be just right, will fail to limit average global temperature rise of 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels by 2035. In fact, there is now virtually no chance to limit the global temperature's rise to 1.5 or 2 degrees under current policies. Even more ambitious country goals and net zero pledges may not prevent our world from warming by an average of 2 degrees this century. According to the UN Environmental Program, there's a 1 in 5 chance we'll see a rise of over 2 degrees even under these conditions. So Nate, the UN climate framework relies on voluntarily submitted nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Are they an effective tool in the fight to limit greenhouse gas emissions or slow down climate change?
Yeah, NDCs really gained prominence around COP21. And I remember being there in Paris, and NGOs were advocating for 1.5 and to keep the 1.5 degree warming target alive. And the reason that we aim for 1.5 and why all hope is not lost just because we won't attain it is because we have to aim for a target that we might not reach in order to deploy the technology and the policies and the incentives to prevent warming. Climate change is not zero sum. Every degree of warming that we prevent is going to lead to better outcomes for indigenous communities, nature, and the planet. So do the NDCs help reach these goals? They help countries plan out how they are going to achieve these targets. So COP is kind of like a giant group project or a committee that collects the best available science and tries to disseminate them. And the NDCs are a bit like the homework that countries do sort of in between these conferences to prove that they're making progress. And many of them are inadequate, but as we're coming to appreciate these days, something is often better than nothing. And it's a way for different groups to look at the strategies these countries are doing and try and make a change.
Well, you compare NDCs to homework, but in most classes you have to submit your homework or you will lose points or not pass the class. However, NDCs are in no way legally binding. Do you think that given the urgency of the issue, the way countries submit NDCs should be reformed, should be changed? Maybe NDCs should be more, have a stronger commitment to the countries that come up with them?
I think it would be fantastic if we had legally binding global carbon targets, but unfortunately that's very, very difficult to achieve. So we do have kind of a voluntary homework system, and if you fail the class, then the world's going to become extremely difficult to live in. So the consequences are there. It's a framework we can build upon. I think whether or not it should be stronger isn't quite the right question. It's how can countries make more ambitious climate actions? And NDCs are one format for them to do that. But it's good to clarify because it's all a bunch of acronyms that are very confusing.
The entire field of climate science is full of acronyms. That gets even worse when you get to climate policy. Liangyi, how do Taiwan's climate goals compare to those we see in NDCs submitted by other developed economies?
I think as you mentioned about Taiwan is not part of the UNFCCC system. So what I observed from the top down to bottom up to have the voluntary homework, as Nate mentioned, is a way for Taiwan to engage. So every 5 years that the regular review system now for the NDC will give a chance for Taiwan to really bring back those homework and to make it legally binding in the nation. So a lot of groups been working on the Climate Change Response Act in 2023 to make it legally binding for the 2050 net zero goal. So I think that's one of the outcomes as Taiwan to contribute, even though the world is getting harder. So one of my participations way back in Copenhagen, I didn't see any chances for Taiwan to get engaged. But then look at now, I think we have a law, we have every year we have a national community that civil society can really monitor and say, hey, do better, get things done. So I think that's the way I would say like Taiwan now is part of the global society for doing some climate action. But of course, it's not enough. We should do more.
Well, are activists here in Taiwan, people who work with climate policy, are they happy with the specific goals that Taiwan is setting for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other climate action? I know that there are activists who organize events like the recent March for Climate in early November that I imagine are there to keep the government accountable. But are activists, are climate people happy with the kind of goals that Taiwan sets for itself?
Of course, not really meet the 1.5 degree yet. So we want to maintain the no nuclear targets, and also having the climate actions. It's really hard, and every sector should really invest in your money and to find your solutions in your communities. And you need to do more educations to your people, like how can we make it sure it's safe and also the electricity can be really managed and then during, the summertime, the peak time, also during the winter time. So I think there's a lot of needed talents need to be joining this climate work. And also I think they can maybe add more from the private sectors and how different people talk about this different branding. I think the greenwashing and how the green society and also green industry, how we look at them, is also different perspective on that.
Well, Nate, COP conferences have not been without controversies. Almost every year there are articles about global leaders and representatives flocking to locations where COP conferences are held in private jets. And the one in Belém also came under fire for possible damage to the Amazon rainforest and the impact on the local community. What kind of signal do you think this is sending to the global community?
Yeah, it's a complicated message because I don't think most people realize just how much business travel and business flying goes on. So when I was doing carbon consulting, a CEO in a major professional services company, they might fly 240 times a year, and they're going to be flying business class. So each one of those flights is 5 times the emissions of another flight. I don't worry too much about delegates flying to COP once a year to discuss it. I worry much more about the other people who fly to COP who are not interested in the outcome, who are there for kind of greenwashing purposes or marketing purposes or perhaps lobbying for more fossil fuels at COP. I worry about those people flying to COP and their emissions much more than activists, delegates, and so on. The COP30 development in the Amazon is controversial, right? Should people who live in the Amazon have the same rights as people in the cities to develop that area, even though it's a significant source of carbon sequestration? I don't have the answer to that, but Brazil feels that the development being there is worth it to draw attention to the Amazon and the development of that site. Now, I'm not going to be flying there this year. That's part of the reason it's not as easy to accommodate as a place like Dubai. But we also have to recognize that COP has grown in size enormously. There was about 25,000 delegates to the COP21 in Paris. COP28 in Dubai had more than 100,000 registered delegates in attendance. So if we're going to make COP the global carbon conference and not the global negotiation for climate, then we're going to have it in places that can accommodate that many people. But then we miss out on representation. So no really easy answer, but I don't worry too much about the environmental impact of the COP conference. I think the benefits of the entire world coming together to negotiate carbon is worth it.
Liangyi, of all the discussions and all the items on the agenda, decisions that hopefully will be made at COP30 in Belém, which ones do you think will have the biggest impact on Taiwan, even though it's not a member of that discussion, both good and bad impact?
Well, there are different perspectives you need to look on that. I think climate issue is as an urgent issue, so it has its own urgency. So there are some people want to push to make decision now this COP. And then also there's many professors or researchers, they think as an arc, as a long run. So it's like a marathon, right? So it's like every 5 years need to review it. So thematically, maybe finance, maybe gender will have some achievement. So I hear there that youth delegates first time to form the delegations and to have gender, to have girls to get involved into this, to make some action to voice out those marginalized community, how women to make a solar panel deal in their community, which is, I think it's a great solution to let the world know that Taiwan is contributing and also leading ahead for those discussions. And also, of course, in terms of the money, who doesn't need money? And then I just heard that the US is not joining the COP, then the global North country, how can we deal with that with the global South country without any resources and technology, right? So I think there will be definitely some tensions between the conversations in COP this year. That I think Taiwan can play a key role on that. How, when even a part of it, but then how can we contribute? But also we need to look back. What is our setback? what is not, we are not good enough, what we are needing for the globe to really look into this small island. When the typhoon comes, when the climate impact comes, like how can we really have the rapid assistance to help our community, for example, in Huali, and to rebuild the communities, and also to have the electricity really supporting systems along the way in the long run.
Another group that is being highlighted at this year's COP are Indigenous peoples, and there will be a strong Indigenous representation in Belém this year. Liangyi, do you think that this will empower Taiwanese Indigenous communities to have their voices heard more in climate conversations that are happening here?
I think definitely to be more inclusive as the democratic communities and countries here in Taiwan as an island. I'm not Indigenous people, but I'm Hakka. So I'm happy to support to be more inclusive with my Hakka community. So I do see Brazilian COP really emphasize the legal rights for the participations. And also I saw the Ministry of the Indigenous of the Brazil, Sonia, she did the conversation and then to promise to have 1,000 Indigenous people really from the Brazil to really have the upper zone conversation on forests, which I think will be really inspiring. And then there will be a mobilization during the COP usually, where they will lead the way, having them say. I think that will be really inspiration to bring back for those Taiwanese Indigenous people who, usually being really ignored from the conversation from the table where we have been making all the decisions, and also to learn from each other, right? So I think all the tribe or the Indigenous knowledge, I think they have the way to survive during the climate impact or adaptations or mitigations when there's traditional knowledge about that. I think that's something that we really need to look into, and then also to build the resilience.